I suppose my question, Nina, is this: is that can you look at people with a straight face and say we are the party for protecting women's rights, as Kamala does, isolating abortion as the reason why they say that, but at the same time continue to support a policy that allows transgender athletes to compete in women's sport, which most people have come around to thinking is a grotesque attack on women's rights?
In this video, Tim Pool joins Piers Morgan on his show, Piers Morgan Uncensored. Tim Pool is joined on the show by progressive wacko Nina Turner. Tim Pool and Nina Turner argue perhaps the dumbest topic in the history of society: trans surgeries for inmates. With that, let's watch Tim Pool wreck dumbass Nina Turner and her virtue signaling BS.
Of ads like this, which aired during the football at the weekend. Let's take a look.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
I suppose my question, Nina, is this: is that can you look at people with a straight face and say we are the party for protecting women's rights, as Kamala does, isolating abortion as the reason why they say that, but at the same time continue to support a policy that allows transgender athletes to compete in women's sport, which most people have come around to thinking is a grotesque attack on women's rights?
Piers, I see this as a distraction. I mean, the question becomes, how often does this happen? It is a distraction. As I travel the country, people are talking about the economy. And that's from all identities, all backgrounds, all walks of life. I just really see this as another way to divide and conquer. And as far as I'm concerned, as someone who served in public office, have served people who serve in public office, you got to get to the nature of changing the material conditions of working class people in this country, transgender and otherwise. I mean, these surgeries and stuff, it is a distraction. People are still suffering in this country. And that's what I want to hear both President Donald J. Trump and also Vice President Harris talk about. And the people in the camps that just want to stir this up, it's just ridiculous. The othering of people is dangerous, Pierce. And I am concerned about that. Distraction. This is not happening wholesale.
Well, it's
in this
interesting.
country.
Okay, let me pick you up on that, because you say how much of this is going on, and I've heard that before from people who try and say it's not an issue. The United Nations a few days ago came out with a really shocking report, which established that around the world 900 women, biological women, have been deprived of sporting medals by transgender athletes. 900. That's not a small, insignificant amount. That is a very large number of people who've had their rights to fairness and equality destroyed at the altar, I would argue, at the altar of a lot of virtue signaling nonsense and a failure to recognize, this is where my position is. I want transgender people to have exactly the same rights to fairness and equality as a woman or a man or me or whatever. Absolutely. But I don't want to see women's rights to fairness and equality eroded in the process. And I think that's not an insignificant thing that can be dismissed as a distraction. And when you add to that the concern that women...
Something I think people have failed to mention on this issue about trans folks in women's sports, or biological males in women's sports, and I'll get back to the whole inmate surgery thing. Something people fail to mention about that is the left likes to minimize it and say, oh, it's just a few people. Who cares? Well, a lot of us should care, because there are plenty of stories that I could list for you in this country and internationally of high school females being severely injured by biological males in sports. So if that happens once, it's too much, because it completely could have been prevented. Anytime you bring up a topic and somebody, I don't know, gets hurt really bad or loses their life, it's like, well, one is too many. But unfortunately, like with driving a car, they're part of our daily lives, but they hurt people, however many deaths a year in vehicles. We're not going to ban all cars. So I think that would be a response to what I said. But cars are just a necessity in the modern age. And I think the benefit far outweighs the risk. In the case of biological men playing women's sports, there's absolutely no reason it needs to happen. As a matter of fact, I think most sane people would say it shouldn't be happening. What are we doing here? So, yeah, if it happens to one girl, it's too many. And then the second piece of that is using the it's only a small percentage thing to blow it off and not have to really engage on the topic like Democrats do. If we continue to put Democrats in a position of power with all the grooming that's going on, with all the indoctrination of our kids, telling them they can be any gender they want to do, and basically this be anything you want attitude and do whatever you want attitude, this what they call a small percentage, which I disagree with that point, but what they call a small percentage is only going to continue to grow and grow and grow. I'm sure most people watching this have seen the statistics of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, how many people identified as heterosexual versus homosexual or bisexual or trans, and the numbers leap almost exponentially every year. That's a cultural shift. It's not this weak argument of, oh, those people weren't accepted back then. They were in the closet. No. You don't get this kind of jump in those numbers, especially in such a short time period, that you can say, oh, it's just people didn't want to admit it before. No, that's not true. So this is a problem that we have a chance of cutting off at the pass and just rejecting as a society early in its development. I wish we would have caught it a lot earlier, but we've got to put a stop to what they're teaching our kids about sexuality, and especially the early ages they're talking about this stuff. Anyway, let's go back to the video.
Women have about the invasion into women's spaces. You add then the issue of surgery, particularly of children, that's been going on. We had this infamous clinic in London, the Tavistock Clinic, which basically mutilating kids legally, and has now been closed down, but irrevocably for some of the poor kids that were put through this. I just don't think that this is a distraction. I think it's a genuine issue, and I think it does make a slight mockery of Kamala Harris's status, as she puts it, as the only one in this race who's going to defend women's rights. Because Trump said, look, I'm not having any of this. I'm going to ban all transgender athletes from women's sport, which I think should be happening now anyway, and they should have either their own category or compete against their biological sex. But I think he's right, and I think a lot of Americans hear that and they go, yes, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, when people bring it up, but what I am saying, traveling the country, nobody has walked up to me and said, Senator Turner, you know what, them transgender, they're impeding on my rights. I'm not saying that what you're putting out there is not legitimate. Yes, long, hard fight for women to have access to sports and to do it in a way that allows women to compete. It makes me think about boxing. For example, in boxing, there are categories, right? There's welterweight, lightweight, heavyweight. I might be out of my depth with all these weights, but I think you both understand where I'm going. Maybe that is the way to go in this country where we set up those categories. A heavyweight is not going to fight a lightweight because 9 times out of 10, the heavyweight is at an advantage to the lightweight. So I get that. Let's have the debate. Let's have it in a way that does not dehumanize people. And let's do that also in a way that does not diminish the other needs that people are feeling, again, no matter how they identify in this country. That is where I am coming from. And when any party ascribes itself or makes itself to be the absolute defender of anything, now you leave yourself open to what they say, live in a glass house. Don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. I think both parties should care very much about women's rights, women's issues, but also the issues of every other person in this country, because most of the people that I am fighting for are working class from all identities, and working class people writ large are being left behind. So when I say it is a distraction, it distracts us from being at the core of the matter, which is material conditions in the United States of America must be changed so that people have the greatest opportunity. People who are not connected, people who are not part of an elite, people who don't have a trust fund, those people should be able to have an equal and great opportunity to live a good life, and the system is skewed the other way. That's what I mean by that.
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
Not diminishing any concerns that someone may have.
Tim, what's your
But let's
response
have
to that?
conversation.
You know, I largely agree that it is a distraction, but I would disagree a little bit in that the top issues right now, according to Gallup, immigration and economics. Are people able to buy groceries? Can they support their families? In places like Chicago, we saw a shocking report where members of the Black community said they felt like they were being replaced as the city was bringing in all of these illegal immigrants. These are the big issues that I see people talking about. But I will say, I don't necessarily think it's wrong to discuss the issue of gender ideology. I think Gallup ranks abortion at the 5th most pressing issue. I don't think gender ideology is close to that, but it still does come up in the news. For me, I live just outside of Loudoun County, and so it's a bit more difficult to escape conversations pertaining to this because, as some of you may know, the big story that came out of Loudoun was a young girl was raped in the girls' bathroom by a trans-identifying male.
Yeah, I'll give her credit. Nina Turner's not she's not completely off the rails here. You know, she pretty much got off the topic right away, maybe trying to skirt the issue. But she is correct that prior to the election and still, the economy is the most important thing on voters' minds. The reason that ad was so impactful and the reason it's an issue is for all the reasons I've discussed thus far, as well as the fact that people on the right wing, I can't speak for everyone, but I believe the vast majority are just completely against this. So one side is fighting to have biological men play in women's sports, and one side is saying that's crazy. So that ad just showed the disparity in the mindsets of the two candidates that were running for president. When Kamala Harris was a senator, I believe she was rated at one time the most far-left progressive senator in the Senate. So, as we know, she flip-flopped on a ton of her positions for this election, purely for the reason that we all know is Democrats have zero principles, mostly, and they will say or do whatever is necessary to gain power. Say what you want about Donald Trump, but he's as consistent a politician as I've seen in my lifetime. And I agree with Nina Turner as well that this is not the number one issue for most voters. However, it does shed light on how far apart and how different the positions and the policies of each party were and still are. And, you know, even though he's a complete whiny liberal, you know, at the very beginning of that ad, Charlemagne was saying, man, I saw that when I was watching football and I was like, I don't want my money going towards that. So while I'm sure he said something like, oh, I was taken out of context. No, you were just describing how you felt when you saw that advertisement. And that's how any sane person would respond to that. Like, are you kidding me? I don't want my money going towards that. So that's why the ad was effective. And it shed a little light for people who didn't follow politics that closely, just how crazy the other side was. And you had it right there in 4K. So there's no saying, oh, it was misquoted or it was taken out of context. No, we got the context and we saw what you said. And I also noticed never when pressed on it did Kamala ever really react to it or explain herself or anything. They knew how insane that statement looked and they wanted to get away from it as quickly as possible. Anyway, let's wrap up the video.
At least that's what everyone around here keeps talking about. When the father comes in, he gets arrested. It's actually a really big deal for us here. So maybe it's a more of a local issue. But I think the idea about, you know, this ad where Kamala says she's for surgeries for inmates, it's not just about that one particular issue, which may be, you know, are we going to give sex changes to inmates? That's a fringe issue. It's the greater picture of gender ideology, which, while isn't the top of mind for most people, the Wall Street Journal did call it a sleeper issue because it's underlying things. I don't think talking about it's going to win you an election. I do agree that running an ad is an attempt to throw Kamala Harris off base so that she's focused on addressing these lesser issues, still important to a lot of people. I think if this election is going to be won, it's going to be won on the question of economics. And I think Kamala has not articulated clearly enough what the actual plan is. I know she said opportunity economy. The response I hear from everybody all the time is, well, what does that mean?
I know I've talked about a bunch of things during this video, but just to be very clear, taxpayer-funded sex changes for inmates is the craziest thing I've heard in my entire life. So that's pretty much my position on that. And Tim's right. That issue specifically is pretty small. Even the entire trans thing in general at this point, I would agree is, lower on the list of priorities as far as what's important to most Americans. We talked about, and they talked about, and I talked about, it was the economy, immigration, crime. But those who understand how dangerous this attitude is, what we're telling children and what we're doing to children with this crazy idea that people can be whatever gender they want, they see how dangerous it is and they don't want it to continue to get worse. And I apologize again for repeating myself, but one side of the aisle supports it fully, be whatever you want, live however you want. And one side of the aisle is like, are you nuts? And I think I can definitively say it wasn't the driving factor in the election, but it played some role to some people just saying, which side do I want to be on? I'm a logical, normal person. I think that's a pretty simple answer. But we want to hear from you. What did you all think about this conversation between Tim Pool and Nina Turner? Let us know. Anyway, as always, we really appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.